In just under 2 weeks, Turkey's president will face his biggest electoral test as the country goes to the polls. Recep Tayyip Erdogan has been in power for 2 decades, but recently his popularity has taken a hit due to Turkey's ongoing economic crisis and his handling of a devastating earthquake. He's also up against an opposition that's finally united around one candidate.
Recep Tayyip Erdogan likes to win. And for the past 20 years, his grip on power has only strengthened. With the help of his AK party, he's transformed Turkey's parliamentary system into a presidential one. He controls the major sectors of the country, from the economy to the military. He's also successfully silenced a number of critics, including political rival Selahattin Demirtas, who's been in jail since 2016. Outside Turkey, Erdogan has increased his influence on the international stage. It was his final approval that allowed Finland to join NATO this year, but he continues to hold up Sweden's membership bid. Erdogan's made no secret of his friendship with Russian President Vladimir Putin, NATO's biggest threat. He's already purchased an air defence system from Moscow, much to the West's frustration. Last week, the two leaders jointly unveiled Turkey's first nuclear power plant, which is being built by Russia's state nuclear company Rosatom. But behind the scenes at home, things haven't been going his way. Inflation is still stubbornly high. Even official figures put it at around 50%. That's created a cost of living crisis that's hurting even the president's most loyal supporters. Erdogan's also trying to deal with the fallout from an earthquake that killed tens of thousands of people. Many blame him personally for responding too slowly to the disaster and for the country being ill-prepared for such a crisis. On top of that, Erdogan's facing an opposition that's managed to unite behind one candidate in order to get him out of power.
I know all of Turkey's problems. We know them all, and we will solve them all. We have the knowledge, we have the experience, and we have the strength. The strength is you, no one else. The power is the people, it is you.
Erdogan spent the campaign trying to hit back, blaming everyone and everything for Turkey's problems.
We are here to open the door of Turkey's century, together with our nation against coup plotters, tutelage defenders, global imperialists, political and social engineering projects.
While Erdogan still has huge support, this time round it may not be enough to secure him another term.
One of the places worst hit by February's devastating earthquakes is the southeastern city of Adıyaman. It's usually a stronghold for President Erdogan, but as our correspondent Julia Hahn reports, people there are disappointed by the government's response.
The cemetery in Adıyaman is getting bigger every day. More than 7,000 new graves have been added here since February's earthquakes. Many are temporary, without headstones. Memories salvaged from the rubble. A bridal veil, a soccer jersey. Sevda Alacan comes here almost every day. She lost a large part of her family in the quakes.
This is my niece's grave. She was 9 months old. Here are my father and my mother. Here is one of my brothers with his children and his wife. Sometimes I wish I had died too. It's hard to go on living like this.
Survived and yet torn from life. This is how so many feel here in Adıyaman. Aylin Dadeviren mourns the loss of her parents and brother. She wasn't in Adıyaman the day the quake struck. When she came back, her family home was gone. Large parts of the city had collapsed. Rescue teams arrived late. People felt abandoned. Aylin is still angry about the government's crisis management.
No one admits mistakes. No one steps down. No one takes responsibility. If the buildings had been built earthquake-proof, if the authorities had checked regularly, then surely fewer people would have died.
Many in Turkey have criticized President Recep Tayyip Erdogan's slow response to the disaster. They also accuse him and his government of not having done enough to prevent unsafe and corrupt building practices. The president, who's fighting for a third term in office, has admitted that there were some shortcomings and promised a reconstruction project of historic proportions.
We're starting the construction of permanent housing, which is the most important need, at a pace that is hard to believe. We're determined to deliver 319,000 houses with their infrastructure, public buildings, social facilities and commercial areas within 1 year.
His main rival in the upcoming elections is Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu, who has a good chance of ousting Erdogan, polls suggest. He claims the president's reconstruction plans will cost the earthquake victims too much money.
We'll rebuild these houses quickly and it will cost you nothing. Why does the current government want to charge you money? If homes collapse because they're not earthquake-proof, then the government is responsible, not the citizens.
Weeks have passed since the earthquakes, and yet the destruction here is still overwhelming, and the survivors' grief and trauma heart-wrenching. Whoever wins the upcoming elections will face a seemingly impossible task: to bring back hope when now there is only despair. At the cemetery in Adıyaman, the discussion about the upcoming elections seems far away. Sevda Alacan hopes that she and the small family she has left will have a future, that they will get the real help they need. And not just empty promises during an election campaign.
Well, let's bring in Julia live now. How do you think the earthquake will affect this election?
Well, it's difficult to say because 11 provinces have been affected by the quakes in Adıyaman, a stronghold of President Erdogan. Many people told us they have lost confidence in the long-time leader and his ruling party, that they have changed their minds. But we don't know how this is going to affect the overall outcome of the elections, because after all, it's a huge logistic challenge to organize an election in a disaster zone. Authorities have said they would set up ballot boxes in temporary shelters like containers or tents. And then there are at least 2 million people who moved out of the earthquake-hit provinces to other Turkish cities. And according to the figures we've seen, only a fraction of them have re-registered their addresses. So in order to be able to cast their votes, they have to return to the disaster zone. The opposition says they're trying to organize buses to get people over there, but there are concerns that many people won't be able to vote in the upcoming elections, and that feeds into overall concerns here across Turkey regarding election security and potential voter fraud. The main opposition alliance says it's trying to mobilize up to 500,000 people to monitor the May 14 elections.
What will be the decisive issues, do you think? Because you don't just have the earthquake, you've also got the financial woes of the country, and they've only got worse since the earthquakes, of course.
Indeed. One of the issues that is worrying voters more than anything is the economic situation. What we've seen here in Turkey in recent years is an inflation-driven cost of living crisis, and that has eroded support for President Recep Tayyip Erdogan. People tell me they no longer know how to pay their rents, their bills. They have to think twice what they can actually afford to buy at the supermarket. Family budgets have eroded. That has angered voters across the political spectrum. And then if you talk to young voters, and millions of first-time voters will head to the ballot box in the upcoming elections. They have never seen another leader than Recep Tayyip Erdogan, and they strongly oppose the current government's clampdowns on freedom of expression, media, lifestyles, and that is something the opposition is trying to use. They promise an end to one-man rule here in Turkey, a return to parliamentary democracy, to freedom of speech, independent institutions. So this election really has turned into a referendum on Recep Tayyip Erdogan's 20-year rule.
So what sort of a chance does the president's main challenger stand against Erdogan?
Well, this vote is too close to call. Polls show that it's a neck-on-neck race between Erdogan and his main challenger, Mr. Kılıçdaroğlu. If none of them gets at least 50% of the vote on May 14, there will be a runoff. The president's challenger has an alliance of 6 opposition parties supporting him and the tacit support of the main pro-Kurdish party, the HDP here in the country. They are seen as a kingmaker. The campaigns are very different. Erdogan is emphasizing his strongman image, his achievements over the past years, mega projects, while Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu is a more soft-spoken character, a former civil servant who addresses voters from his modest kitchen at home, who's trying to present himself as someone who can solve people's problems, who is about reconciliation and not polarization. But as I said, it's going to be a very tough race.
Yeah, and the mega project ahead is rebuilding the country, of course. Who's going to pay that cost? Julia Hahn, thank you very much for your reporting from Istanbul.